Administration for today's committee markup, first of all. And we do have a quorum, so we can proceed. I would note that the meeting record will remain open for 5 legislative days so that members might submit any materials that they wish to be included therein. And the measure before the committee today is to direct the architect of the Capitol to obtain a chair featuring the logo of the National League of POW MIA Families and to prominently place it on display in the U.S. Capitol. This measure, which was introduced by Representative Steve Lynch of Massachusetts, we think would be an extremely powerful symbol in our nation's capital, honoring American prisoners of war and Americans missing in action. And as members of Congress, obviously we each represent districts where so many brave men and women went off to stand on the battle lines in defense of our nation's freedom, our liberty, our way of life. The importance of remembering and honoring their great sacrifice can never, ever be overstated. Our nation has a responsibility to them and to their families who have shared in their sacrifice, and we must never forget. This chair will serve as a permanent reminder of the enormous sacrifice made by those who served our country and were taken as POWs or listed as MIA. They deserve to be honored, they need to be honored in the U.S. Capitol, which is a symbol itself of our American beliefs and the liberties and freedoms they sacrificed to defend. And I would just say for me personally, when I would look at a chair like that, I would think about a fellow who lives in my district. His name is Donald, but we call him Digger Odell. He's now in his 80s, but he served 5.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton, the infamous Hanoi Hilton. Of course, there were 123 of those guys. Another one of them is our colleague, Sam Johnson. But, thankfully, Digger made it home, as Sam did, after all those years in North Vietnam camp. And today he serves as a member of our local Air Base Community Council. He chairs a fundraising event for Special Olympics. And so he's just a remarkable fellow. But he's just one of many who selflessly, serving our nation, faced enormous adversity. So I think it's just very important that we, especially here in our nation's capital, remember their stories and their sacrifice for our great country. And with that, I would now recognize my colleague, committee's ranking member, Mr. Brady, for the purpose of an opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you for considering this measure today. Advancing this legislation brings us one step closer to giving American POWs and MIAs the honor that they do deserve. In the Philadelphia area, chairs have been placed at many of our sports venues and local city halls. And just a few weeks ago, the Philadelphia Eagles recognized this effort during halftime at one of our home games. By placing a chair like this in the nation's capital, we will send a message to those service members and their families that we will never forget their sacrifice. I would like to thank many of my constituents who brought this issue to our attention, and I urge my colleagues to support the legislation.
Thank the gentleman. Would any member like to offer an amendment to this bill?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I'd like to move to strike the last word. I'm not going to offer an amendment, although I was thinking about whether we might somehow involve the one prisoner of war that we have in our house, Sam Johnson. I don't know, putting his name on it might involve disrespect for others, so I didn't want to make that amendment. But I would like us all to think how we might involve honoring Sam as part of this process.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Good suggestion, and I'm sure that we will incorporate Sam in any way and every way that we can, in an appropriate way, certainly for recognizing his service as well. Any other member like to offer an amendment? Then I move that the committee favorably report the bill. The question is on the motion to favorably report the House to the House the bill. All members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed say nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. And I would also ask unanimous consent that the staff be authorized to make any technical and conforming changes to the measure the committee just considered and to make other modifications with the concurrence of the ranking minority member of the committee and notification to all members of the committee. Without objection, so order. That will conclude today's markup. And we will move on and now call to order the Committee on House Administration's hearing today, which is going to be on the U.S. Copyright Office. The hearing record will remain open for 5 legislative days so that members may submit materials that they wish to be included. Today we're holding this hearing to discuss the current IT functionality of the Library of Congress's Copyright Office, areas where the Copyright Office is focused on improving their overall customer service, and how working together the leadership within the library and its Copyright Office are meeting the demands of today's digital age. We would ask our witnesses to come forward. I see them as we're making our opening remarks. Wow, you were all back in that room? That's okay. The Copyright Office is one of 7 business units within the Library of Congress and operates using both appropriated funds as well as the fees that it collects for copyright registration, recordation, and statutory licensing to manage the disbursement of royalty payments. Each year, the library's Copyright Office examines approximately 500,000 creative works, such as books or songs, movies, software, internet platforms, and provides a copyright of authorship to those individual products. The library is charged to administer our nation's system of copyright law, which it inherited back in 1870, is really a huge responsibility that promotes innovation and creativity. And for writers, singers, producers, IT developers, the copyright process provides clear lines of authorship and ownership of their creative products and protects them as they are distributed throughout the world, a task that is becoming increasingly complex and challenging in today's digital world. Today, of course, we're streaming and we're downloading content. We're using social media and multifaceted internet platforms and software constantly updated to improve customer interface and security. The mission of the Copyright Office, which is so critical to innovative growth in the world today, is to provide customers with the assurance that their hard work and investment will be protected. It's to instill the confidence people need to invest in a new idea or a new product. And again, in today's fast-moving digital world, that assurance is increasingly difficult to provide. So the technology and business model needs to evolve for today's customers. And it does so with each of the 7 units. And the library's central IT office plays a critical role in supporting the Copyright Office, including providing a technology infrastructure and the support for needed capital improvements. The 2 entities rely very heavily on one another. Understanding the scope and significance of this operation, it's very concerning to read the GAO report that was released just earlier this year outlining the library's longstanding weaknesses across several IT areas, including the copyright. According to the reports, operational and organizational challenges within the library and its Copyright Office have resulted in a serious backlog with the registration and recordation system, causing extensive wait times, some as long as 18 months, this has been noted. In addition to outdated technologies and insufficient IT capabilities, especially with the recordation process, the GAO also identified deficiencies related to data integrity and security. It also highlighted the lack of a library-wide strategic plan to address all of these problems. In its report, the GAO included 31 recommendations for the library to address these weaknesses. Perhaps most importantly, they also highly recommended that the library hire a chief information officer. So our committee, of course, will be looking for an update on where the library is with these recommendations, and as well, what caused a recent IT service outage that affected a number of library-supported systems, including the Copyright Office. In fact, for more than a week, an entire week, in September, the online copyright registration system, which is referred to as ECHO, was down for a week because of the outage. So the committee obviously wants to hear from the library regarding the current IT system and how those operations have been impacting its Copyright Office and the copyright community. The committee is also interested to hear how overall customer service experiences will be improved. The committee will also be hearing from the Register of the Copyright Office today and how the Copyright Office's own management structure fits within the broader library system, if the Copyright Office is receiving the required support from the library, and how these 2 entities, again, are working together to correct the current issues that they face today. And then finally, we'll be hearing from the GAO about the problems identified in the March report and the library's progress implementing its recommendations. I would just note that I know there have been a number of people that have been advocating for some period of time that the Copyright Office actually be independent from the library, but that is not the purpose of today's hearing. That's not what we're talking about today. Today, we want to hear how library management, both the acting librarian and the registrar of copyrights, is working together diligently to fix the immediate problems before them to improve their operations and customer support. I want to thank our witnesses for their appearance, and I will more formally introduce them in just a moment. But now I'd like to recognize my colleague and the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Brady, for purposes of his opening statement.
Thank you, and I want to thank the chairman for calling this important hearing today, and I'd like to congratulate David Mao on his new responsibilities as acting Librarian of Congress. Madam Chairman, I have a longer statement for the record, but would like to make a few comments before we hear from our witnesses. I want to be clear that I support keeping the Copyright Office in the Library of Congress, but I also want to be clear that the Library of Congress needs to support the Copyright Office. This starts with solid operations supports, including a laser-like focus on informational technology, and I hope to hear today how the Library of Congress Office are working together to provide creators and inventors good customer service. I am pleased with the work that David and his team at the library have done, but that is just a start. And I look forward to hearing about how we can continue to make important progress in this area. I thank the chairman again, and I yield back the balance of my time.
No, I thank the gentleman. And I would also like to congratulate David Mao as I formally introduce him. He became the acting librarian on October 1st, 2015, so you're just getting your feet wet, so to say, but not really, because he had previously served as Deputy Librarian of Congress from January of 12th of 2015, and before that, he was the 23rd Law Librarian of the Congress, serving in that position since January of 2012. He also has experience in the library working as a section head for the Congressional Research Service, and also became the first Deputy Law Librarian of Congress. He's also has experience in the private sector, working in private practice for a number of years. He graduated from George Washington University, obtained his law degree from Georgetown University Law Center, and also has a master's degree in library science from the Catholic University of America. So we welcome you, sir. Maria Palente was appointed as a registrar of copyrights on June 1, 2011, after serving 5 months as the acting registrar of the Copyright Office. She also served as the Copyright Office, as Deputy General Counsel from 2007 to 2008, and as an Associate Registrar and Director of Policy and International Affairs from 2008 to 2010. Ms. Palente also has extensive experience working in the area of copyright. Before coming to this office, she also worked as the Assistant Director of the Authors Guild Incorporated, and then as Executive Director of the National Writers Union, focusing on copyright policy, transactions, litigation, and freedom of expression issues. She is a 1990 graduate of the George Washington University Law School, where she earned her bachelor's degree she earned her bachelor's degree from Misericordia, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, University in Pennsylvania. And then finally, Joel Williamson is the Managing Director of Information Technology Issues at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. In this position, he has overall responsibility for the GAO's evaluations of information technology across the federal government. Since joining the GAO in 1979, he has led numerous reviews of information technology systems and management at a wide array of federal agencies. He frequently testifies on information technology issues before congressional committees, appearing as a GAO witness on more than 100 occasions. So you're a pretty old hat at this, I would say, and we appreciate you being here. Received his bachelor and master's degree in business administration from the University of Iowa. So again, we thank you all for joining us, and at this time, the chair would recognize the Librarian of Congress, David Mao.
Thank you, Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brady, and members of the committee. Good morning. I'm honored to testify before you today in my 9th week as Acting Librarian of Congress. Since 1800, the library has faithfully served Congress. Congress placed the copyright function in the library in 1870, and since then, the library has contributed to the government's constitutional role to promote the progress of science and useful arts. Copyright deposits have been a resource for generations of Americans, and we take seriously our stewardship of this important record of America's heritage. Factors leading to the 1870 Act still exist today. However, improvements are needed. Copyright law needs to be updated. Regulations and processes must keep pace with the demands and expectations of copyright users. The Copyright Office infrastructure needs to be strengthened and modernized. The library is a resource of knowledge that furthers intellectual and creative activity, and customer service is crucial to our work. I know the Register shares my goal to provide services when, where, and in whatever form modern users expect and demand. We'll work together to develop the updated processes and modernized systems to meet the needs of and serve our customers and stakeholders. The library has developed more than 250 enterprise systems and applications over the past 50 years. While achieving these successes, though, some areas have not kept pace with the development of technology and general standards and best practices. I assure you that these are a top priority. We have work to do to achieve a high-performing IT environment that supports the entire Library of Congress in serving you and the American people, and we are firmly committed to achieving this objective. GAO's March report documented IT issues that require immediate attention. As acting Librarian of Congress, I accept responsibility for implementing strategies to forge a new path forward. These strategies are built on 3 key pillars: leadership, collaboration, and secure accessibility. First, GAO identified the lack of a permanent Chief Information Officer, and I'm happy to report that Mr. Bud Barton joined the library as permanent CIO this past September. He heads the newly aligned Office of the CIO, specifically focused on providing IT leadership and services. With his guidance, the library began implementing changes to ensure that IT strategic planning, procurement, and management are considered at the appropriate levels and consistent across the library. The CIO and I meet weekly to review the status of these changes and issues identified by the GAO and the library's Inspector General. Second, collaboration is essential to managing IT investments and resources effectively. The library is committed to providing an IT framework built upon performance, reliability, security, and adaptability, and that allows flexibility for specialized systems best managed at the unit level. The CIO is implementing agreements across the library for delivery of IT infrastructure and services to support normal business operations. We're in a time of change and recognize that ongoing communication and adjustment is necessary to ensure that collaboration continues successfully. We share GAO concerns about potential duplication in IT services between the Office of CIO and library units. However, an enterprise model provides for individual control of critical systems and development processes while also ensuring effective use of resources and preventing investment overlap. Third, ensuring security while allowing access to data is one of the most significant challenges in handling digital content. Collection items such as paper and books are relatively easy to protect. Digital content, on the other hand, requires secure storage systems, backups for data protection and preservation, and access management policies for users. These challenges are complex, but not insurmountable. The library has a long history of protecting digital content while simultaneously making it accessible, and we're proud of our record of doing so. We'll take the steps required to ensure copyright materials remain secure. The library is committed to reaching for the highest levels of customer service, and I'm confident that our current strategies and planned improvements will allow for us to do so. We're working closely with the GAO audit team and the library's Inspector General to fulfill their recommendations. Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brady, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. You'll find additional detail on recent IT management improvements in my written statement. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes Registrar Palante.
Chairman Miller, Ranking Member Brady, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this public hearing and for your concern in particular about customer service. My staff and I have dedicated the past few years to modernization issues, both assessing gaps in the copyright law and gaps in copyright administration. Through this work, it's become clear to us that major operational changes are needed for the Copyright Office if it is to meet the dynamic needs of the global marketplace that we serve. Technology is obviously the cornerstone of a modern copyright system. This is why in October 2011, I announced a number of multi-year special projects, including a technical upgrades project, from which we published a major assessment of customer experiences and a series of baseline recommendations. The project team recommended that we develop a robust, responsive, and highly secure enterprise architecture decoupled from library operations and dedicated to the unique and critical mission of administering the copyright law. I also created the first Chief Information Officer position on the Register's management team in 2012. This Copyright Office CIO was a recommendation from public interest organizations and copyright owners alike, but this is just the beginning. The Copyright Office will need a robust team of technology and data experts. These experts should not merely be assigned or on call from another part of the agency, but rather be integrated into the Copyright Office mission, where they can work side by side with legal and business experts, and with direct, not indirect, accountability to the register. Just yesterday, I released an exciting 5-year plan, copies of which you should have received, that draws upon several years of deliberative analysis and public processes. It incorporates extensive public recommendations. As stated in the plan, modernization is about more than upgrades to hardware and software. The office is at a time where we need to re-envision almost everything we do, including how customers register claims, submit deposits, record licenses, file security interests, share royalty information, and utilize expert resources. Although it is not the focus of this hearing, many policy issues are dependent upon modern IT systems, including improvements to music licensing, orphan works, and small claims solutions. In the current paradigm, modernization will depend upon and be subject to IT services from the Library of Congress. But this central management of IT resources has never worked well for the copyright community. It has, in my opinion, quite literally disconnected the registrar's statutory responsibility to administer the copyright law from the tools, technologies, and staffing that are necessary to do so. It should be alarming to all of us that under this arrangement, no one in the agency has complete control of or complete accountability for the authoritative records of copyright ownership under US law. IT challenges are difficult to divorce from larger governance questions. The library and the Copyright Office have always had important but distinct missions. It does not serve either institution to further conflate or entwine them. Such conflation, in fact, is contrary to the original goals of Congress, which in 1897 created the Copyright Office for the purpose of separating copyright functions from library functions. These boundaries were important then, but they're all much more important today. My goals for the Copyright Office reflect all of my experience as a copyright attorney, some 25 years, and 4 years of public processes that I conducted as register. Our customers should be able to transact easily, quickly, from anywhere at any time using consumer-friendly platforms, mobile technologies, and modern metadata. They should have searchable digital records that provide the life cycle of a copyright interest from creation to public domain, and a chain of title that supports integration of third-party data. These services, performed properly, will fuel any number of innovative businesses and ensure that both authors and users of intellectual property receive the benefits and the presumptions of the law. This is what copyright administration is about in the 21st century. In closing, I want to thank my colleagues at the Library of Congress and my friend David Mao for engaging on these complex issues. And I want to thank GAO for sharing its expertise this past year. I hope that the library can support these goals, but over the past few years, that support has been subservient and it has also been hostile at times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes Mr. Williamson for his testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. Ranking Member Brady, members of the committee, thank you for inviting us to testify today. As requested, I'll summarize our statement on our reports issued earlier this year on IT issues at the Library of Congress and at the Copyright Office. Regarding the Library of Congress, our March report identified weaknesses in numerous IT management-related areas. Examples of these were, 1, not having an IT strategic plan detailing how the library intended to address future goals and strategies, which was especially important given that information is increasingly being created, shared, and preserved in digital formats. 2, the library had a highly inaccurate and inconsistent inventory of its information technology assets. 3, the library did not know how much it was spending on IT. In the absence of such information, GAO conducted work to estimate expenditures and determined that the library had at least $119 million in IT obligations for fiscal year 2014. 4, the library was not effectively overseeing its investments in IT, and its acquisitions were not always guided by well-developed risk management and cost and schedule estimating approaches. 5, deficiencies in information security and privacy practices and associated technical controls place systems and data at risk of unauthorized access, modification, or loss. 6, the library's central IT office did not provide services that satisfied the other operating units. Accordingly, these other units often considered other options for addressing their IT needs. A key factor contributing to these and other weaknesses was that the library lacked a chief information officer with clear responsibility and adequate authority. Subsequent to our report being issued, the library appointed a chief information officer. However, it remains to be seen whether this position will have clear responsibility and adequate authority to drive needed improvements. Overall, the library generally concurred with our 31 recommendations intended to provide a sound foundation for improving the management of IT. Further, the library has initiated a range of actions to address the recommendations. However, none of the 31 has been fully implemented yet. Looking forward, the library needs to commit to milestones for implementing our recommendations and focus on meeting those milestones in order to make progress in improving its IT management. Turning to the Copyright Office, our March report identified a number of IT challenges, particularly with regard to the Electronic Copyright Office System, or ECHO, which is used for, among other things, the registration of copyrights. These challenges included numerous user complaints about the performance and usability of the ECHO system. We also reported that the Copyright Office had proposed investments in several IT improvement projects, but had not yet developed an IT strategic plan to guide its efforts. We noted that the office had been hindered in developing long-term plans due to the absence of such plans for the library as a whole. In addition, dissatisfaction with IT services provided by the library led Copyright to pursue its own IT activities. Since GAO's review, Copyright has issued an overall strategic plan that, among other things, describes goals and objectives for improving its IT environment. Going forward, Copyright will need to follow through on its intentions to develop a more detailed IT plan that will include specific strategies, costs, and timelines. Such an approach, if implemented effectively, can lay the groundwork for modernization of systems critical to its mission. That concludes the summary of my statement. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. And before I start my questions, I've been asked by the Copyright Alliance to enter in for the record and with UC, if I could, a report that they have here, Improving Customer Service for the Copyright Community. Without objection, I will enter that into the record. Certainly listening to Mr. Williamson articulate a number of the recommendations that were in the GAO report is eye-opening. So I guess let's just start with that. And if I could ask Mr. Mao, here you have 31 recommendations, which he didn't go through all of them, but really, apparently none of them have been implemented yet, even though the library did say that they were going to start some of them in September of this year, which had not happened. I do know that you've hired the CIO, but I don't think you've strategically outlined all the various areas for how that's all going to work. So perhaps you could just tell us, I'm sure you've read the report and dissected it, and I'm hopeful that you can tell us how you would be prioritizing all of these various recommendations that they've made to you.
Thank you. Yes, and we have taken the 31 recommendations, and by our account, some of them are completed, and we're working right now with the GAO audit team to get validation from them that they are indeed completed. We've met with them regularly to discuss them, and we'll continue to meet with them regularly going forward to ensure that all of the 31 recommendations are completed. We have a schedule that will allow us to complete the 31 recommendations hopefully by 2018.
Is that something you can share with the committee?
The schedule?
Yes.
Certainly we can. I'm happy to provide it to you.
Could you just tell us Like, what is your top priority? What is the one, two, three, perhaps, or something?
Well, the top priorities were identified in earlier, and one of them, of course, the number one priority was hiring a permanent CIO, which we do have on board. And I understand Mr. Williamson's comment that it remains to be seen whether the hiring of this permanent CIO will completely close out that recommendation. But he has started just in September, and I think we've made good progress with him in the last 2 months, and look forward to proving to the GAO that we can close out that particular recommendation. In addition, we have created an IT strategic plan that was identified in the GAO report. That's in its final stages right now to be shared with the Executive Committee very shortly, and we hope to have that released by the end of this month. We're also implementing processes and procedures for IT investment strategies going forward to make sure that all of the information we collect and all of the information is shared transparently across the entire library, and also that information submitted by all of the units for their needs are considered. And that process was just recently started for our preparation for the fiscal 2017 budget cycle. We considered new and expanded program requests from all of the units, and we walked through the process as we've identified. And certainly our regulations and internal guidances will be modified to reflect all of these processes that we're putting into place.
I appreciate that. Mr. Williamson, as you've heard that, maybe you've already familiar with that list of priorities. What is your thought about those priorities, or should they be looking at other priorities? What do you think?
I agree with the acting librarian on the first priority, appointing a CIO. Definitely agree. Now, the next step is making sure that the CIO has adequate responsibility and authority to carry out that mission. And that's what we'll be looking for over the next couple months. In addition to seeing that the CIO has oversight over mission-critical systems and takes more of a leading role on what we refer to as commodity IT, back office systems, financial management, human resources, email, laptops, cell phones, et cetera. We'd like to see more of an active role there. The other critical things that we think from an immediacy standpoint that need to be addressed, you need to get a clear inventory on exactly where your assets are. And they've made a lot of progress on that. They're doing some reconciliation now. One of the reasons for that is you got to know where your access points are from an information security standpoint so that you can protect your systems and your data. Secondly, they need to get a handle on IT spending, and they're in the process of doing that. So it's not to say they haven't made any progress. They've made tremendous progress. They're not quite there yet. And then there's some information security weaknesses from a patching and perimeter control perspective that they need to focus on. And they've probably made the most progress in the information security area. You may know we also issued a not-for-public release in-depth security report that had 74 recommendations. They've already made progress on many of those recommendations.
Very good. Well, I'm delighted to hearing that you're making that kind of progress, and that you look at the GAO report as an opportunity and a help and a tool of assistance, not in an adversarial way. And sometimes when people are critical of our nest, we have a tendency to see that as an adversarial kind of thing, but we shouldn't look at it that way. Audits, and GAO in particular, can be extremely helpful for every agency. Ms. Palente, you and I had an opportunity to chat on the phone for quite a while yesterday about various things that are happening in your agency, and I mentioned to you that in my former life as a Michigan Secretary of State, where we had jurisdiction over the DMV as well. I had the largest agency, I guess, in state government at that time, but we always said that customer service was the operative phrase for everything that we were trying to do. And I know that is so in your department as well. And talking about this ECHO, I know that's how it's pronounced. I don't know exactly what it means, something. But that is an ability for your customers to file online, essentially, I guess, right? Maybe you could talk about that a little bit. What is that? Is that particularly helpful? You mentioned about the customer experiences and so on and so forth. And you also said that you just released this report yesterday. So, I mean, I have not had time to even, I'm just looking at it right now. But anyway, we will enter it into the record without objection. But perhaps you could talk a little bit about whether or not your customers look at your current system, the ECHO system, as something that is really customer service oriented, that it's easy for them, that they have a good experience with that.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. So I think one way to look at ECHO, because it predates everybody at this table, is that it was a good first-generation system. It's 10 years old, and it was probably outdated by the time it was implemented. I get to say that because I was in private practice in New York at the time, and I wasn't there and don't really know whether it was state-of-the-art at the time or not. I do think that off-the-shelf software was a big push in government agencies at that time, and I think those were probably the instructions coming from the appropriators in conversations with the librarian's office about budget. And I will further say that I think one of the biggest issues is that and again, this may reflect the period, not so much the agency. The goal was really to replicate the paper processes that had been in place for a century into some kind of electronic interface, rather than create a digital interface that harnesses digital technology and connects to the global marketplace, which is where we are today. So when I was appointed Register on June 1st, 2011, immediately in talking with my staff and doing a lot of external stakeholder meetings, it became clear to me that ECHO was something we needed to look at closely. What I wasn't counting on was that ECHO, as the software application that we manage, was sitting on top of a network and operating system and an IT governance model that really held the key to the effectiveness of whether that could be developed further or not. So I'm not an auditor or an accountant. We have somebody here to answer those questions, but this becomes a sunk cost issue, right? So I'm not a fan of ECHO. Most people are not. It's probably not a flexible enough software package to further customize and invest in. It never extended to recordation, which is different than registration. That's where one records security interest and wills and estates and any other way that you're going to track IP rights in the world. Recordation is still paper. I think we might want to consider it a blessing that we didn't go ahead and dump recordation into ECHO 10 years ago as well. That's not to say it hasn't been painful to have that be a paper process, but I've come to believe that we have an opportunity now to get that right. And in doing recordation right, go back and integrate registration at the same level. So in the 360 that I did and the technical upgrades report that I released, it documents many of the frustrations. It's too slow, it's too clunky, it's not intuitive. One can't go into the system and track where they are on the process. I'll say this, whatever frustrations the public experiences are then some on the employee side who are on the other side of that software package using it day in and day out. So with that in mind, and having done the baseline report, we do outline here the kind of administration that we really should be offering the public.
Well, I'll take that as an answer that you don't really like the system. And it is obviously very antiquated, and so one of the things coming out of this hearing and following as well is the library is prioritizing resources in IT investment, et cetera. We'll be interested to see how all of that works. I mean, we have to know so that we can help you. That's really the purpose of this hearing, so that this committee can be aware of the challenges that you're all facing at the library and all across the library, but certainly in the Copyright Office with IT challenges and how we can assist getting us up to speed so that customers, I mean, waiting 18 months for some of these things is a huge handicap for.
Those are paper processes, just so you know, not the electronic.
Okay, the paper process.
There are members who have constituents who still prefer to mail things in by paper, so that's the extreme end. But it should be immediate. Yeah. You're right.
All right, very good. The chair recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. David, thank you for your testimony. It's clear that you're doing a good bit of work very quickly at the library. It's a great institution with great resources for us and for the American people. We are friendlies here. We want to be able to be helpful to you. So anything that you need, when you need anything from us, just let us know, and maybe we can get ahead of something before something becomes a lot bigger than we can have to handle. So stay in touch with us, and we'll stay in touch with you. I know we're here to talk about the copyright, but I hope you give me a little few minutes on some details on other priorities that the library is doing now under your watch.
Thank you. Well, let me tell you about my goal during this time as acting Librarian of Congress. And my main goal for this period is to ensure that the Library of Congress is best positioned for the future. That's it. The topic of today's hearing, IT management, certainly is a part of that priority and part of that goal. It's a great priority, but there are others as well. Other priorities for me, in particular, are focusing on the staff at the Library of Congress, our human resources. We need to take the time to invest the time and the resources, develop our staff currently, and develop future staff. Certainly, collection care is something that we all worry about at the Library of Congress, and that's another great priority. But I think if you take all of these, the IT management, the human resources, the collection care, all of them can be supported by the pillars that I talked about in my opening statement, talking about leadership and collaboration, communication, and good governance to make sure that we can support all of these. And so I look forward to working with not only my colleague, the Register of Copyrights, but all of the senior leaders across the Library of Congress, as well as the very, very dedicated staff that we have at the library, and you members of Congress, to ensure that the Library of Congress continues to be the great institution that it is. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. I have no other questions.
Chair recognizes Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to each of you. There's obviously a little perceived tension on what your job is and what you have to do, and we want to be very sensitive to that to make sure that you have everything that you need to function properly. You have the great responsibility to oversee the Copyright Office, which is of tremendous importance and becoming more important every day, and I can imagine that 10 years ago we had no real concept for what we were going to be, or no feel for what we were going to be doing today, and the challenges we'll have as we move more and more into a digital age, and how that's going to be done. And you have not only to take care of it there, but to take care of those users and customers, we shall say, that are out there. And Mr. Mao, you've got an even larger responsibility, but we can't, in that larger responsibility, we want to make sure that we're doing everything that you're going to need to do that job. That's the purpose of this hearing. So if ECHO is not the future, it's really not even the present, what do we do? Do you have a recommendation that you have for what you need, how much it would cost, and if you had that available, how quickly it could be implemented?
Well, thank you. So yes, this strategic plan outlines in great detail our recommendations for moving forward, as well as the broad copyright community, so all parts of it: copyright owners, individual authors, businesses, public interest organizations, the tech sector, et cetera. Again, ECHO is almost the last piece. That's the software application for certain services that the public interacts with. Before we, and that would have been my early intuition as register, could we please throw away ECHO and go to something open source? Can't be that hard. But in fact, it has to be related to the underlying operating system, who has the ability to maintain and access that, who has administrative privileges, how that relates to a robust, secure enterprise architecture designed with all of the different services in mind. One of the big issues we have is that all of the services are not integrated. It's really frustrating, right? I mean, if you're looking for rights, you want to look for registrations, but if you registered a book or a movie in 1985, chances are it's been assigned or licensed multiple times, including internationally. That's the chain of title that we need to acknowledge, and that has...
So how do you get everything in one universe?
Yep, and it requires legal thinking and IT thinking at the same time, and that has been very disconnected in the past.
And is it something, though, with work, funds,
absolutely,
and determination, you're clear in your report, and I looked at the report last night, my late night homework, to look at it. So, Mr. Mount, tell me what you've been doing to address these concerns as far as meeting with your new your CIO and with the Register to make sure that you're going to be able to accomplish those goals.
Well, thank you. First thing I want to say is that the Copyright Office's concerns are concerns for the Library of Congress, and certainly they're a concern of mine, and we take them all very seriously. And so we are moving aggressively on that, and I think we've done so in the last few months on trying to address the Copyright Office's concerns, especially in the IT arena. We've instituted a draft strategic, or not instituted, we've developed a draft IT strategic plan that links, that when released, you'll see that it links with the recently released Library of Congress strategic plan for fiscal years 2016 to 2020, and also works in concert with the strategic plan that the Registrar has released. In addition, we are working very closely by communicating. The CIO speaks on a regular basis, if not a daily basis, with the CIO for the Copyright Office so that we can make sure we understand the concerns that are being raised and that we can address them to make sure that we can provide the service and support that is needed.
And does Mr. Barton have the authority and autonomy to move towards those things that Registrar Palante needs to do?
Yes, indeed. So the CIO is a member of the library's executive committee. As I'd mentioned earlier, I meet with him on a weekly basis to talk about the challenges that we're facing and how we're addressing them. And he's taken a great first couple of weeks, in place and moving right ahead. And I believe Mr. Williamson had indicated that he's impressed with the progress that we've made in a very short amount of time. And so we'll continue with that moving forward.
Of course, I realize he's only been on the job since September the 8th, not even 3 months, and I know that those are ongoing issues and concerns that we have, but it's certainly got to be, these are things that we as a committee expect you to be able to work through, work out, and we're here to help. And so come to us when those things are here and give us that plan, what we've got to do. This is something we cannot neglect. And we want to certainly, and I know this is something that Chair Miller is very committed to doing, and we'll continue to have follow-up to check that progress, I'm sure. With that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Lofgren.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for this hearing. Mr. Mao, welcome to the committee. You come at a time of a great transition for the library, and certainly your predecessor did many wonderful things in his long career. Being a techie was not one of his fine points. So you have your work cut out for you, as I'm sure you're aware. I listened carefully to all of the testimony, and I'm the only member of the committee that serves on both the Judiciary Committee and this committee. And I don't want to get too far into the weeds on copyright law, but you have to some extent. Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act assigns to the registrar certain functions to provide for exemptions for circumvention provisions. And this has been problematic. I'm sure you heard from your constituents a couple of years ago when the office said you couldn't take the cell phone that you own and utilize it, and of course we had to go back in and change it. You may not have heard of the time that the registrar declined to approve in 2010, I believe it was, the circumvention so that blind people could get text to voice. The reason why you didn't hear about that was because the Librarian of Congress, thank God, overruled the registrar on that very bad decision. So I do think there has traditionally been a great value in having the office located in the library itself. I just want to express, since I'm here and we haven't had the registrar in the Judiciary Committee, some grave concerns about the latest lack of exemption for vehicle research. As you know, almost every automobile now has software in it. And what the ruling has done is that if your auto mechanic has to circumvent the software to repair the car, they violated the DMCA, because there's a specific ruling by the registrar that third parties can't circumvent the software. I think that is a wrong-headed decision, and I think it's also a dangerous decision, because all of the software defects in automobiles, and there are many, unfortunately, have been found out by third parties. The manufacturers aren't the ones saying, by the way, your car can be hacked. It's third parties. So I'm hoping that the registrar can share this with the new acting librarian, and he might be able to step in and put some sense into this issue. Getting back to funding, I noticed in the GAO report, which is very helpful, and I am so appreciative of the GAO. You guys wade in, you don't have an agenda, you just try and figure out what's going on. You're not perfect any more than any of us are, but you call it as you see it, and it's so appreciated. You're really a valuable asset for the Congress and the country. And I noticed that you've talked about on page 23, the registrar basically hasn't formatted a plan, which I think is problematic, but obviously any plan would need to be funded. Now, I believe, and I don't know if you looked at this, Mr. GAO, that it is the office's position that the fee-setting authority would not allow fees to fund the IT upgrades and expansions. I don't think that's true, because the statute actually says that when setting fees, the reasonable costs incurred by the Copyright Office for providing registration, recordation, and, quote, provision of services can be the basis for the fees. And any tech company in the world would include software development as part of the provision of services, and something that would be, I think, part of this fee structure. Did you have a chance to look at that?
We did not look at that specific issue.
I wonder if you could take a quick look at that.
Okay.
And the other thing that I'm wondering about is, does the Copyright Office receive more in fees than it is allowed to spend in the appropriations cap, and how much reserve is currently sitting in the Copyright Office's treasury? Maybe, anybody who can answer that would be welcome to do so. Anyone who knows the answer.
I'd be happy to answer that. I'd also like to say, although I don't want to debate Section 1201, that the acting librarian signed the rule that went out this year that you've referred to after extensive consultation, based on a 400-page analysis and a year-and-a-half process. The reasons for all of the exemptions are noted in great detail, and also provide the input of the Secretary of Commerce as required by the statute. With respect to the fees, under the current fee structure, we have recommended that the language, which dates back a couple of decades, be adjusted to allow for some apportionment to charge for capital improvements. Yes, it allows us to charge for some inflation and some additional costs, but effectively we're charging for the cost of the service as we're rendering it. There are other tweaks, whether we can charge in the aggregate and cover cost in the aggregate, et cetera. How we protect small actors versus asking big actors to pay a little bit more. These are bigger policy issues that will require some statutory recommendations from us. The appropriators have asked that we conduct a public process on these issues, which we are in the middle of formulating at the time. With respect to the reserve, we are asked every year to articulate what we think we will receive in fees. And we base that on our best judgment and calculations. And in a good year, we recover more. In a bad year, we recover less. When we recover more, it goes into a reserve account, which we then draw on for the next budget cycle. So for example, in the FY17 budget cycle, which we are now putting proposals forward for, some of the things we want to fund, like for example, making historic records searchable that have finite cost, are well funded out of a set finite reserve amount of money.
It was actually a simple question. What is the amount in the reserve account.
What is the amount right at this moment?
Right.
I wouldn't know, but we have,
Well, let
it's
me
not
ask-
much. It's, under $5 million normally.
I just wondered, I mean, I don't have an agenda here, I just wondered what the amount was. And I would know
Yeah,
that
we usually estimate within $2 or $3 to $5 million, we get it right.
the fee-setting authority was given in '97 with the electronic filing pilot program in 2006. So I think if you look at the plain language of the statute, you can charge off. And I'm saying this because
We can
I
char-
don't think the taxpayers ought to be paying for this. When it comes to the patent office, the patent applicants pay for everything. There's no taxpayers' money in the patent system, and I don't think the taxpayers ought to be subsidizing this either. I think users ought to pay for it.
May I respond to that, please?
No, because I think this is, my time is over and I'm going to yield back, but that's just my opinion, and obviously there's a longer discussion, a philosophical one, but what the taxpayers pay for and what they don't is something that, we need to talk about.
I thank the gentlelady. And the chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Nugent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate this hearing. It's a big change from a hearing I just came from in regards to ISIS, so it's actually a pleasure. But, when I was Chief Executive Officer of a sheriff's office, IT would come in and I'd sort of glass over in regards to, my big thing was, well, you should just be able to make that work. And I found out that it's always not as simple as that. But my question really goes, obviously there's some angst here. As it relates to the CIO for the Library of Congress, how many subdivisions does that CIO have under its broad authority within the Library of Congress?
Well, in part of our realignment process launched earlier this year, where we realigned a lot of divisions across the library, not just the CIO office. Our first draft at that has the CIO sitting above with various units under it, for example, like development or off the top of my head, I can't think of the exact titles. But then that's the next management layer underneath that. Are you talking about with respect to the others, specifically to the service units?
Like with the registrar. I mean, what number of subdivisions does the CIO actually control? Because, Ms. Plant, you have your own CIO? So how many CIOs does that CIO deal with on a daily basis?
I see, I understand your question now. There are two other CIOs, Chief Information Officers, currently at the Library of Congress. One works in the Copyright Office and the other one works in the Congressional Research Service.
Okay. So when the Library of Congress's CIO was interviewed, hired, Ms. Plant, did you have any input into that?
Yes, we had people meet the two finalists after the fact. Yep.
Okay.
Before he was hired.
There was an answer given, and you kind of rolled your eyes as it relates to the CIO today in regards to, I guess, working relationship.
No. No, the question that was asked was, does he have sufficient authority? I believe that the CIO and the state of best practices for CIOs is that they report to the top of the agency, like I report to the top of the agency. In that way, you have the trust and partnership and same level of leadership that you need to really decide what part of the agency is going to do what. What I was objecting to, and I think we've discussed internally, is that the CIO does not report to the librarian, but reports to a chief operating officer position that was created, which in turn reports to the deputy librarian, which reports to the acting librarian. I would like to see that addressed. I've been outspoken about that.
Mr. Mao, do you have any comment in regards? I mean, that makes a lot of sense. When you have all these different bureaucracies in between, I think it then becomes a little more difficult. As the librarian today, you have to make decisions, and particularly in resources, I would think. How do you do those developmental resources that you have two subdivisions that need help? Would it be easier if that CIO reported directly to you?
Well, in our estimation, the way we planned our reorganization or realignment, it was what we considered to be the best structure. And the Chief Operating Officer reports directly to the Librarian of Congress. It's similar to, as Ms. Palante was saying, the Register of Copyrights. All of the senior executives, members of the Executive Committee, in purpose, all report up to the Librarian of Congress, or in this case, the Acting Librarian of Congress. The Chief Information Officer sits on the Executive Committee along with all of the other senior executives in the library. As I mentioned, I meet weekly with the Chief Information Officer to discuss, and so I make sure that I'm aware of what is going on in terms of our challenges and making sure that we're staying on top of what is happening. Now, that's not to say that changes can't be made. Certainly,
Well, who makes that decision? Who makes that decision as to the reporting requirements of those department heads?
It would be the librarian. And so when we launched the initial realignment earlier this year, it came from the librarian's office.
Which you have now taken over.
That I'm a part of, yes.
You're part of, yes. Would you have any recommendations in the future as to how to go forward to make sure that from a customer standpoint, you know, the registrar's office is a customer of yours, as she has customers of that particular subdivision? How do you propose to fix that, to make sure that your customer is getting the proper service in regards to the proper?
Well, that is the goal for the Office of the Librarian, which is to make sure that all component parts of the Library of Congress, whether it be the Copyright Office, the Congressional Research Service, the Law Library, are all receiving the support needed so that they can carry out their missions. And that is the goal, and that is what we do.
Okay. Well, I think we've beat that up enough. I appreciate it, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Vargas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Pleasure to be here again. You know, I always measure things in a very basic way. How many complaints do you get versus how many compliments do you get on something? And I have to say the Library of Congress is very skewed. I get lots and lots of compliments, very few complaints. Truth of the matter. Most people are very, very happy the Library of Congress and the work they've been doing, and I wanted to say that publicly because that's certainly what I've experienced. It's not the case with other agencies and other things that we do in government, but certainly with the Library of Congress, it's been very skewed on the compliment side. Again, I wanted to say thank you for that. I also wanted to say this, that Madam Chair, when you mentioned the DMV, there was a little thing that went down my spine, and I remember California, we were redoing, I'm from California, we were redoing the DMV in our IT processes, and I remember after we spent about $200 million, we gave up on that process and went back to the drawing board, and this was using a lot of those high-tech companies in California that were so expert supposedly on this. So again, the IT can be a real nightmare, and I'm very conscious about that. But I was happy to hear from the GAO, and I'd like to question you a little bit further on this. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when I first heard you describe some of your recommendations, I thought that you were leaning more on the negative side. But then you used the words tremendous progress were being made, especially in information security. Could you go a little deeper in that? Because, I thought that was very positive.
Well, in my opening remarks in the oral statement, I summarized primarily the results of our March report. Since that report, we found the library to be very responsive to our recommendations, and they made a lot of, I think, very excellent progress. There's a lot more to do. I think they were probably a little overly optimistic in thinking they were going to complete between 12 and 15 recommendations by September 2015. It's going to take a little longer than that, especially to see evidence of the implementation of the recommendations. And even though it may seem that we're in somewhat of an adversarial position, I feel like we've had a very constructive relationship, that we're all after the same thing to try to make IT management better. I think along the way we can save some money and make things more efficient, and then also focus on the mission-critical needs of some of the service units like the Copyright Office.
Excellent. Well, let me ask you a further question then. So you're saying that they've made excellent progress, but they were a little overly optimistic. Where do you think the problems are going to become, or are going to come from for this overly optimistic view that they have?
Well, I think the reality of this is the central provider of services and the service units, they're going to have to reach agreement on who's going to do what. And I think that's going to be not an easy process.
And do you give recommendations for that?
We generally do. I mentioned the term commodity IT a little bit earlier, and that's distinct from mission critical systems like some of the systems that the register mentioned. Commodity IT is like laptops, cell phones, human resource systems, financial management systems, servers, data centers. Those are usually within the purview of the Chief Information Officer. When it comes to mission critical systems like replacing ECHO and all of its associated systems, the business side needs to take the lead in defining those requirements and then turn it over to IT, whether it's internal or to a contractor, and say, here's what I need, give me your solutions. Tell me what you can give me in return. And so those requirements, that's really what the register and her team to lay out. This is what we want the new system, the new process to look like. This is what kind of availability, what kind of security, what kind of performance we want it to have.
Okay, well, again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you said that you had a very constructive relationship with them. So I hope that constructive relationship continues and you give some guidance on these issues.
That's just my view. I'm not speaking for the other two witnesses here, but I thought it was.
I don't see them jumping up and saying no, so I'll take that as an affirmation. And lastly, again, I would say that I appreciate the work that the library does. I've personally been very, very impressed with the work, and again, thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate the time.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mr. Davis from Illinois.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I will not follow up my colleague's question to get a response from you about working together with Mr. Williamson. I too assume that you guys have a great working relationship. Excuse me. It's also interesting to note that most of the discussion here centers upon the federal government's inability to develop better IT practices. You're certainly not the only one that's affected by this in the federal government, and I think we do need to shine the light and make it a little more noticeable and put better practices in place. And Ms. Plant, I would like to mention, obviously one of the key issues for you and for us is ensuring public availability of the records that you're tasked with keeping. And I know there's much more work to be done to put that modern technological infrastructure in place. And I do believe, and from some of the comments we heard today, that most of you will agree too, that government's not the only entity that can fix this problem. And without objection, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to submit a statement from the Internet Archive into the record. So
ordered.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I'd like you to take a look at this if you have not yet seen it. Some of their recommendations that can help maybe make some progress in what we're discussing here today. But my first question, Ms. Palante, are you looking at any private resources or capabilities to fill the gaps in services or areas that the Copyright Office cannot support at this time?
Absolutely. Copyright law.
How can you leverage some of these resources?
Yeah, copyright law is incredibly intertwined with technology. Copyright law has traced technology since 1790, right, from the printing press to our iPhones. So the entire copyright ecosystem that we serve are already technology experts. That stakeholder group, we would like to have more involvement in the underlying systems that serve them. So I guess going back in time, what I would suggest probably was a mistake is not putting out the IT plan that has so fundamentally affected our customers, right? There's nothing that the Copyright Office does that isn't a public process. We operate under the APA. We have to. Courts have to rely on our opinions, et cetera. So oddly, the operational infrastructure that is under the entire act of copyright administration was an agency decision, internal. And again, I think for us to be able to have technology advisory committees, to be able to have flexible federal contracting, that we, again, another service that we get from the mothership, but which hasn't worked that well for us. We need much better support in those areas. We need to be able to have short-term and long-time hires, both, to have state-of-the-art expertise. We need to be able to have interoperability between private sector standards and government sectors, otherwise copyright law won't work. So all of that is in our plan.
So that's in your plan. I like the connotation of the mothership. I haven't heard that at many hearings. It's interesting to get it on your side rather than our side. I appreciate your candor. And, I know you've made recommendations in your testimony. You've made recommendations just now. What question haven't we asked you that you feel needs to be answered that can get us to the point where you come in and sit at that table and talk to us about the IT successes and talk to us about how Echoes, or the next generation of Echoes, working well?
Well, thank you for that question. I think
everybody else
the
took
question
out
you haven't asked me is, I guess the question I would ask you is, why should our copyright customers feel satisfied by a renewed commitment to the same central process that just failed us so miserably? What we're asking for is the autonomy to make sure that IT is intertwined with our business and legal expertise. Quite frankly, even if Bud Barton, who is tremendous, and Doug Ament, my CIO, can agree that ITS, which is the library's IT department, will be more responsive, will have better staff, they're still serving 7 departments that have nothing to do with the Copyright Office. They're library departments. It's a very different mission. And it's really odd to me as the Register that everybody reports through the Register's office, the general counsel, the policy experts, the registration experts, the recordation, all the business experts, except the IT, which is somewhere else, reporting to someone else. And so how do we train them in the mission? How do we keep them integrated so that it's not separated? Because it's not only that it hasn't worked well, it's been a failure, a complete failure. And so that just can't work in the future. I don't see any way it's going to work.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with all 3 of you to work with you toward those successes. So thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes Mrs. Comstock.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I too, like Mr. Vargas, appreciate the great work of the Library of Congress. I'm a daughter of a librarian, so I love my libraries and appreciate all the things we're doing there. But I am sort of baffled by the trying to, sort of the antiquated, I think you called it, Ms. Plante, the 19th century system that we have here. And, noted in your testimony, you talked about how really it was always intended to be separate, and instead of having that autonomy that you need to do your job, we've made it more top-down, mothership kind of orientation, which is sort of against everything we're all doing these days. The reason we all have our own personal phones and things is we still like having flexibility and whatever our needs demand. So I am very interested in making sure, given the important economic driver that you're having, I think there's 2 very different missions here. Library of Congress is our history. It's Thomas Jefferson. I'm from Virginia. I love our library, but you're very tied to this huge international economy. And the idea that for 9 days you were down, I just am baffled as to, 9 hours I'd be tearing my hair out. 9 minutes most of us would be demanding answers. So for 9 days, that just is clearly a system that's not working. So I just wanted to maybe expound a little bit more upon how we can make what I think is an outmoded and inefficient system for you work so that we make sure this important economic driver in our economy is going to be maximized to the needs it should be, and what maybe legislative changes or anything that we might need to do to make sure you are making the most of this great economic driver in our economy.
Thank you so much for that. I think that the Copyright Office wants a long-term relationship with this committee. We want to be able to put forward suggestions for all kinds of things on operations. But the area where we really disagree, the Copyright Office and the library, and it was referenced by my colleague and boss, David Mao, is in duplication of IT services. So that is designed, and again, putting aside the conflation of the two missions over time, which was really done for operational savings and goes, I think, against the reason that Congress created the office. The duplication of services can't mean that there's only one CIO, that CIO makes all decisions with respect to the national copyright system, because de facto IT will affect the outcome of the system. And it can't mean that we can't develop our own staff of technology and experts on data to work in our business units. I frankly think about a third of our staff has to morph into tech and data expertise. It used to be catalogers, now it needs to be technology and data. I don't know how we can administer the law without it. And so when you're looking at duplication of IT and you're trying to save money, don't do it at the expense of the copyright system. And I think that's really where the real tension is.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman. Pleasure to be here today. I would say that one of the great advocates that you have in Congress, on the Library of Congress, is Representative Greg Harper. I know he just stepped out, but he loves you guys. He's always talking well and always advocating on your behalf. So little kudos, little word to Representative Harper on that. Obviously, we've got to get to the 21st century when it comes to technology. We can't be keeping score with an abacus anymore, obviously with the cyber threats and some of the things that we're seeing, serving on Homeland Security and some of the other committees that I have a role in, is specifically going after some of the things that we're seeing, whether it's state-sponsored, whether they're criminally driven, whatever it might be. And I think we've got to do a much better job long-term on it. A couple questions that I have. Let me start with Mr. Mayo, if I could, please. According to the GAO's report, apparently the library did not know how much it was spending on IT. Can you tell me what is the library doing to make sure that's clearly communicated? I think it's a very important point.
Yes, and so we've instituted some processes this year that we've just started with this current fiscal year, 2016, to make sure that we can track our investment expenditures, and we're going to continue to develop that so that we can continue to have a better handle on what our investment expenditures are going forward. Now, that said, we're also working with the library's Inspector General and working on identifying better ways for us to further refine the categories in our financial management system so that we can better track some of those.
You agree? You see when that's important, I would imagine. You see when that's important for people to know that you guys are confident knowing how much money is going in there. Is that something you...
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Your confidence level in the library's ability to monitor its systems and protect itself against external threats. One challenge I was reading in the GAO noted in its report was the library had not conducted complete security testing, stating that the library had installed continuous monitoring, but that guidance to service units on how to carry out this policy and regularly carrying out the testing had not always occurred. Can you speak to that, and maybe to any improvements the library has made specifically in that realm?
Yes, and since that recommendation has come out, we have indeed moved forward with training staff, as for example, that you mentioned, so that we ensure that they understand what the policies are and what it is that they must do to ensure the safety.
Kind of work together. Just having the information and knowing what to do with it is very, very important. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayo. Ms. Palente, notice that some of the records from the Copyright Office are still in paper form. I don't know if you can put an exact number, but what would the value be if this information was maybe taken from paper form and put into digital form? I would imagine some of this is very important documents.
Yeah, well, there's...
Can you try that mic again one more time?
The value would be enormous to the economy, to culture, to research. There are two pieces, though. One is historic records that stop in 1978. Those are plausibly important to commerce, but they're old, right? they're much more interesting for statistical research and following trends and identifying data rights. The piece that is still paper that's unforgivable is that the recordation system itself, the process where you come as a company or an international business and record your security interest or your copyright interest in major motion pictures or in software, that is still paper-based, and which means that people submit it. We've moved now to thumb drives. Staff then retype it. Then there's a verification activity, and that needs to be automated. We've done 2 major reports on that, and the question is, who's going to bring it online? Who's going to have the investments? Where are those going to be directed? To the library or to the Copyright Office? In some kind of partnership? How's it going to work?
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you, Ms. Palente. With that, Madam Chair, I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I thank all the witnesses for being here today. This committee hasn't had a hearing on the copyright for quite some time, and but certainly the GAO report sparked everybody's interest and attention, and you can see by the participation that we've had here today that there's a great amount of interest from this committee and a huge reservoir of goodwill toward the library from every member of Congress, certainly every member on this committee as well. On the other hand, one of my favorite sayings is the largest room is a room for improvement, and we have a very large room for improvement particularly with IT for the copyright, and I think especially when you think of what a critical component it is, an impetus for our economic, for the economy. Goodness. So I hope you will look at this committee as a vehicle to help resource you and help advocate for what you need to be able to do there, and not wait for us to ask the question. Please feel free to come forward with recommendations that you have on kinds of challenges that you're facing and what you need. Just because you don't hear from us, or because we have a hearing, let's face it, we probably didn't ask you all the questions you thought you were going to get asked. We asked ones that you never thought you were going to get asked, maybe. And so if we didn't ask the right question, let us know about that. And without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit to the chair additional written questions for the witnesses that they might have that we'll forward and ask you to respond, because I'm sure all of us will have some, typical, right? You go back to your office, all of a sudden you think, geez, I should ask him this. But at any rate, we thank you all very much. We look forward to continuing to work with all of you for our mutual constituency, quite frankly. We all have the same constituent in this case, the American taxpayer. And without objection, this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you.